In the vastness of space, where 1,000 civilizations have risen and fallen, there exists one universal truth that every species has learned the hard way: some bonds are too dangerous to forge. Every race that has ever encountered the Kithra has made the same choice: abandon them before it's too late. Every species, that is, except one. Humans, as usual, are about to prove why the galaxy thinks they're completely insane, and why that might just save everyone. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her gloved hand against the observation window of the research vessel Endeavour, watching the massive derelict station slowly rotate in the darkness of space. The structure was ancient, built by the Velothi Concord 3 centuries ago and abandoned for reasons that made every non-human crew member on board visibly nervous. "I still think this is a mistake," muttered Crix, the ship's Zephyrian navigator. His forearms worked frantically at his console, as if staying busy might somehow protect him from whatever lurked within the station. The Velothi don't abandon anything lightly. If they left this place, there's a good reason. Captain Maria Rivera studied the scanner readings with practiced calm. She was one of those humans who seemed completely unaffected by the fears that gripped other species. Where they saw danger, she saw opportunity. Where they whispered warnings, she heard challenges. "The scans show life signs," she said, her voice cutting through the bridge's tense atmosphere. "Faint, but definitely there. Whatever the Velothi left behind is still alive after 300 years. Dr. Thos, the ship's Krillian medical officer, made a sound that might have been a whimper. His species was known throughout the galaxy for their advanced medical knowledge and their complete inability to handle stress. "Captain, with respect, perhaps we should simply report the location to the Galactic Survey Division and move on. Some discoveries are better left to others." Sarah turned from the window, her dark eyes bright with scientific curiosity. "That's exactly why we need to investigate personally. 3 centuries is a long time for any life form to survive in an abandoned station. The biological implications alone could revolutionize our understanding of survival adaptation." The Krillian's tentacles writhed nervously. "Dr. Chen, you don't understand. The Velothi don't just abandon things. They evacuate. They run. And, when the Velothi run from something, the rest of the galaxy pays attention." "What exactly are you so afraid of?" Sarah asked, genuinely puzzled. She had worked with dozens of species over her career as a xenobiologist, and she had never seen such universal dread about a single location. Crick stopped working at his console and turned all 4 eyes toward her. "You humans are new to the galactic community. There are things you haven't learned yet. Things the rest of us know through generations of bitter experience." "Such as?" The navigator exchanged glances with Dr. Thos, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Crick spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Kithara." The name meant nothing to Sarah, but its effect on the non-human crew members was immediate and dramatic. Dr. Thos actually recoiled, his tentacles pulling tight against his body in a defensive posture. Even the usually unflappable Andromedian communications officer seemed to shrink into her shell. "What's a Kithara?" Sarah asked. "Trouble," Captain Rivera said simply. "But that's exactly why we're here. To learn about things that trouble other species but might not trouble us." Dr. Thos made that whimpering sound again. "Captain, you don't understand. They're not just trouble. They're bonds that can't be broken. Connections that become stronger than the individual. Every species that has ever tried to care for them has had to make the same choice eventually. Which is, abandon them or lose yourself completely." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but it wasn't fear. It was excitement. This was exactly the kind of mystery that had drawn her to xenobiology in the first place. "How can a life form force a bond?" "They don't force it," Crix said quietly. "That's what makes them so dangerous. The bond feels natural. It feels right. It feels like the most important thing in the universe. Until it becomes the only thing in the universe." The captain studied the scanner readings again. "Life signs are weak but stable. Whatever's in there has been surviving on minimal resources for a very long time. Dr. Chen, prepare a survey team. We're going aboard." "Captain." Dr. Thos's voice cracked with strain. "Please reconsider. The Kithara are not just dangerous to individuals. They're dangerous to entire crews, entire colonies. There's a reason every spacefaring species has protocols about them. What kind of protocols? The Krillion's tentacles drooped with resignation. If you encounter them, you leave. Immediately. No contact, no study, no attempt at rescue or aid. You just leave. Sarah felt her scientific curiosity burning brighter. That seems cruel. If they're intelligent beings, surely they deserve better than abandonment. That's what every species says at first, Crix muttered. The Helixians said that. The Zartani Empire said that. The Crystalline Collective said that. They all tried to help. They all tried to study. They all tried to be better than the species that came before them. And they all made the same choice eventually. Abandon them or be consumed by them. Captain Rivera stood up, her decision made. Dr. Chen, you'll lead the survey team. Take Jenkins and Okafor for security. I want full bioscans of whatever we find in there. If it's as dangerous as our friends here seem to think, we need to understand why. Dr. Thos made one last desperate attempt. Captain, there's something else you should know about the Kythera. They're not fully mature when they're abandoned. The life signs you're detecting, if it is a Kythera, it's probably still young. So we're talking about rescuing children, Sarah said, her voice taking on a hard edge. And you're all suggesting we should just leave them there to die. Not die, Crix said softly. Survive. They always survive. That's part of what makes them so heartbreaking. They can survive alone, in conditions that would kill most species. They just wait. Forever, if necessary. Waiting for someone to care about them again. Sarah felt something twist in her chest. The idea of any intelligent being, especially a young one, waiting alone in the darkness for someone to care was almost unbearable. How long do they wait? As long as it takes, Dr. Thos whispered. Some of the stations we've found had Kythera that had been waiting for over 1,000 years. Still hoping. Still believing that someone would come back for them. But no one ever does. No one ever can, Crix said sadly. That's what you humans don't understand yet. It's not that we don't want to help them. It's that helping them becomes the only thing that matters. Everything else, your ship, your crew, your family, your entire civilization, becomes secondary to their needs. Captain Rivera's expression softened slightly. That doesn't sound necessarily evil. Just intense. Intensity that grows stronger with time, Dr. Thos explained. What starts as a desire to help becomes an obsession. What begins as care becomes complete devotion. And what feels like love becomes a kind of madness that consumes everything in its path. Sarah absorbed this information, but it didn't change her fundamental reaction. If anything, it made her more determined. So we're talking about beings that inspire such strong protective instincts that other species can't handle the emotional intensity? You're oversimplifying, Crix warned. It's not just emotional intensity. There are physical changes too. Psychological alterations. The Kythera don't just inspire care, they somehow enhance it, amplify it, make it deeper and stronger than any natural bond. How? We don't know, Dr. Thos admitted. No species has ever been able to study them long enough to find out. The bond forms too quickly, and, once it does, objective research becomes impossible. The captain made her final decision. We're going aboard. If there are intelligent beings in there who have been abandoned by every other species in the galaxy, then it's time someone tried a different approach. 2 hours later, Sarah found herself floating through the docking tube that connected the Endeavour to the derelict station. The structure was massive, clearly designed for a large population, but her sensors showed only one weak life sign deep in what appeared to be the residential section. Jenkins and Okafor flanked her, their weapons ready but not drawn. Both were experienced security officers who had seen action on a dozen different worlds, but she could see the tension in their movements. The stories told by the alien crew members had affected them too. The station's corridors were dark and filled with the peculiar stillness of long abandonment. Emergency lighting flickered sporadically, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently of their source. The air was stale but breathable, maintained by automated systems that had somehow continued functioning for 3 centuries. Life sign is getting stronger, Jenkins reported, checking his scanner. Whatever it is, it's moving toward us. Moving fast, Okafor added, her hand moving instinctively toward her sidearm. Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but not with fear. With anticipation. After years of studying alien life forms, she was about to encounter something that had confounded every other species in the galaxy. Something so compelling that entire civilizations had been forced to abandon it rather than risk being consumed by it. They rounded a corner and found themselves in what had once been a residential common area. Furniture designed for the Velathi's unique physiology was scattered around the space, covered in dust and showing signs of hasty abandonment. Personal belongings were scattered on the floor, as if the previous occupants had left in great haste. "Over there," Sarah whispered, pointing toward a cluster of pod-like structures in the far corner of the room. The pods were unlike anything in her xenobiological database. They appeared to be grown rather than constructed, with surfaces that seemed to shift and change color in the flickering emergency lighting. Most were dark and obviously empty, but one still glowed with a soft, pulsing light. As they approached, Sarah could see movement inside the active pod. Something was alive in there, something that had been waiting for 3 centuries for someone to find it. "Should we call for backup?" Okafor asked nervously. "Not yet," Sarah said, though her own pulse was racing. "Let's see what we're dealing with first." She activated her recorder and approached the pod carefully. The surface was warm to the touch and had a texture like living skin. As she ran her gloved hand over it, the glow inside intensified, and she could see more clearly what lay within. It was definitely alien, but not in the way she had expected. The creature inside was roughly humanoid in shape but appeared to be covered in something that might have been fur or might have been some kind of energy field. Its face was partially visible through the pod's translucent surface, and it seemed to be looking directly at her with eyes that held an unsettling intelligence. "It's beautiful," she whispered, not entirely sure why she had said that. The moment the words left her lips, the pod began to open with a soft hissing sound. The creature inside stirred, and Sarah found herself looking into eyes that were deeper and more expressive than any she had ever seen. They held a mixture of hope, longing, and desperate need that made her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. The creature tried to sit up but was obviously weak from its long dormancy. Sarah found herself reaching out instinctively to help it, her scientific training warring with a sudden overwhelming urge to provide comfort and care. "Dr. Chen," Jenkins said urgently, "maybe we should maintain some distance until we understand what we're dealing with." But Sarah was already kneeling beside the pod, her hands supporting the creature as it struggled to emerge. The moment her skin made contact with its fur-like covering, she felt something she had never experienced before, a connection that went deeper than physical touch, deeper than conscious thought. For an instant, she could feel the creature's emotions as if they were her own, centuries of loneliness, an ache of abandonment so profound it defied description, and, underneath it all, a desperate, overwhelming gratitude that someone had finally come. The experience lasted only seconds, but it left her shaken and changed in ways she couldn't yet understand. She looked into the creature's eyes again and saw recognition there, as if it understood that something significant had just occurred between them. "Are you hurt?" she asked softly, her voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. The creature made a sound that might have been speech, though it was unlike any language she had encountered. But, somehow, impossibly, she understood the meaning behind it. "Waited so long. Thought no one would come. Thought everyone had forgotten. We're here now," she said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "You're not alone anymore." Jenkins and Okafor exchanged worried glances behind her, but Sarah was completely focused on the creature in front of her. It was trying to communicate something else, something urgent. "Others gone. Only me left. They said they would come back, but they never did." Sarah felt her eyes filling with tears she couldn't explain. The creature's pain was so raw, so real, that it seemed to resonate in her own chest. "Who left you here?" "The tall ones. The ones with the kind hands. They said I was getting too strong, too much for them to handle. Said they would find others who could help. But no one came." The Velathi, Sarah realized. "They left you here when you were just a child." The creature nodded, and Sarah saw that it was indeed young, despite its time in the pod. Probably the equivalent of a human teenager, abandoned because its growing abilities were more than its caretakers could handle. "What's your name?" she asked. "Zeph." "My name is Zeph." "I'm Sarah," she said, feeling another wave of that strange connection wash over her. "We're going to help you. Will you leave too? When I get stronger?" When the bond becomes too much, the question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She looked into Zeph's eyes and saw not just the pain of past abandonment, but the expectation of future betrayal. This creature had been hurt so deeply by the loss of its caretakers that it couldn't even accept help without fearing it would be temporary. No, she said firmly, though she had no idea why she was making such a promise to a creature she had just met. I won't leave you. You say that now. They all say that. But, when the bond grows strong enough to change you, when caring for me becomes more important than anything else in your life, you'll make the same choice they did. Sarah felt something shift inside her, something fundamental and irreversible. The rational, scientific part of her mind was screaming warnings about unknown alien influences and the dangers of uncontrolled emotional responses. But, the deeper part of her, the part that had always been drawn to creatures in need, was already committed to this being in ways she couldn't fully understand. Then, I guess we'll find out together, she said, helping Zeph stand on unsteady legs. Behind her, she could hear Jenkins reporting their status to Captain Rivera, his voice tight with concern. But, Sarah was only peripherally aware of the outside world. Most of her attention was focused on Zeph, who was looking at her with an expression of wonder and fragile hope. You feel different from the others, Zeph observed, though Sarah wasn't sure if the creature was speaking aloud or if she was somehow hearing thoughts directly. Your emotions are warmer. Stronger. More willing to accept intensity, maybe, Sarah said, though she wasn't sure what that meant. Are you hungry? Thirsty? Do you need medical attention? I need connection. Understanding. Someone who won't be afraid of what I am or what I might become. Sarah looked into those expressive eyes and made a decision that would change not just her life, but potentially the relationship between humanity and an entire species that had been abandoned by every other civilization in the galaxy. Then, you've come to the right species, she said with a smile that felt completely natural despite the extraordinary circumstances. Humans specialize in impossible connections. As they made their way slowly back toward the docking tube, Zeph leaning heavily on Sarah for support, she could feel the creature's emotions mixing with her own in ways that should have been alarming but somehow felt perfectly right. For the first time in centuries, Zeph wasn't alone. And, for the first time in her career, Sarah had found a research subject that felt less like work and more like destiny. What neither of them knew was that every other species in the galaxy was about to learn something new about humanity, something that would either save the Kithra from eternal abandonment or prove once and for all that some bonds really are too dangerous to forge. The walk back to the ship felt like the beginning of something unprecedented, something that would challenge everything the galactic community thought they knew about the limits of interspecies relationships. In her arms, Zeph represented not just a scientific discovery, but a test of humanity's capacity for the kind of love that every other species had found too overwhelming to sustain. Sarah Chen had no way of knowing that she had just signed up for the most important and dangerous relationship of her life. The medical bay of the Endeavour had been converted into a makeshift xenobiology laboratory within hours of Zeph's arrival. Dr. Sarah Chen worked tirelessly alongside Dr. Thas, whose medical expertise proved invaluable despite his obvious discomfort with their patient. The Krillion's tentacles remained in constant motion, a sign of severe anxiety among his species, but his professional dedication overrode his personal fears. Physiologically, the subject appears to be in excellent health, Dr. Thas reported, his voice carefully clinical. The stasis pod technology preserved all biological functions perfectly. Brain activity is remarkably high, off the charts, actually. I've never seen neural complexity like this in any species. Sarah monitored Zeph's vital signs while the young Kithra rested on the examination table. 3 days had passed since the rescue, and the connection she felt with Zeph had grown stronger with each passing hour. She found herself thinking about the aliens' needs even when she was supposed to be sleeping, waking up in the middle of the night with sudden concerns about Zeph's comfort or emotional state. Dr. Chen, Dr. Thas said quietly, pulling her aside. I need to discuss something with you privately. They stepped into the adjoining office, where the Krillian activated a privacy screen before speaking. Your neurochemistry has changed significantly since you made contact with the Kithra. Changed how? Sarah asked, though she had suspected something like this was happening. Elevated oxytocin levels, increased activity in the emotional processing centers of your brain, altered sleep patterns. Your body is producing bonding hormones at levels I've only seen in new mothers caring for infants. Sarah considered this information without alarm. Is it harmful? Not harmful, exactly. But profound. The changes are accelerating. At this rate, your brain chemistry will be completely reorganized within weeks. Reorganized toward what? Dr. Thassa's tentacles writhed nervously. Toward total devotion to the Kithera's well-being. This is how it begins with every species. The caretaker becomes biochemically addicted to caring for them. Sarah looked through the privacy screen at Zeph, who was now awakened, looking around the medical bay with curious eyes. The moment their gazes met, she felt a warm surge of affection that seemed disproportionate to their short acquaintance. What if that's not necessarily a bad thing? She asked. Dr. Chen, you're a scientist. You understand the dangers of compromised objectivity. I also understand the dangers of abandoning someone who needs help. Dr. Thas made a frustrated chittering sound. You're already showing signs of prioritizing the Kithera's needs over rational analysis. This is exactly how the process begins. Sarah returned to the main lab, where Zeph was sitting up on the examination table. The young alien had recovered much of its strength over the past few days, and Sarah was struck again by how expressive those unusual eyes were. There was an intelligence there that seemed to encompass far more than simple awareness. How are you feeling? She asked, settling into a chair beside the table. Better. Stronger. The connection with you helps me heal faster. Zeph's voice came directly into her mind, a form of communication that no longer seemed strange to Sarah. But I can feel your worry. Your colleague is frightened. Dr. Thas is concerned about the bond between us, Sarah said honestly. He thinks it might be changing me in ways that could be dangerous. It is changing you, Zeph replied matter-of-factly. The bond changes everyone. That's why they all leave eventually. Tell me about the bond, Sarah said, activating her recorder. I want to understand what's happening between us. Zeph was quiet for a long moment, those expressive eyes focusing on something distant. My people evolved on a world where survival required absolute cooperation. Not just working together, but thinking together, feeling together. We developed the ability to share emotions and memories as a way to build unbreakable family units. Family units? Each Kithera bonds with several caretakers who become like parents, siblings, and children all at once. The bond ensures that the caretaker's well-being becomes as important to us as our own survival, and our well-being becomes essential to theirs. Sarah felt a chill of understanding. So it's not just that you inspire strong emotions in caretakers. You actually share those emotions. The bond is mutual. Zeph confirmed. When you feel protective of me, I feel loved and secure. When I feel content, you feel fulfilled and happy. Our emotional states begin to synchronize. And it gets stronger over time. Much stronger. Eventually, the bond becomes so complete that separation causes physical pain for both participants. Some bonded pairs become unable to function independently at all. Sarah absorbed this information, trying to maintain scientific objectivity even as she felt a growing sense of rightness about her connection with Zeph. What happened to your people? Where are the rest of the Kithera? Zeph's emotions suddenly shifted to profound sadness, and Sarah felt an echo of that grief in her own chest. Most of us died when our homeworld was destroyed. The survivors were scattered across the galaxy, taken in by various species who thought they could provide care, but none of them could handle the intensity of the bond. The Helicians tried for nearly a century. They established entire colonies dedicated to Kithera care. But, as the bond strengthened, the Helixian caretakers began to neglect their own species' needs. Their entire civilization started to revolve around us. Sarah could see where this was heading. They chose to preserve their own culture by abandoning yours. It wasn't malicious, Zeph said quickly, apparently sensing Sarah's flash of anger. They genuinely believed they were making the best choice for everyone. The Crystalline Collective tried a different approach. They attempted to limit the bonding process through technological intervention. What happened? The artificial limitations caused severe psychological trauma for both species. Several Kithera died, and many crystalline caretakers suffered permanent emotional damage. They abandoned us even faster than the Helicians. Sarah stood up and began pacing, her mind racing through the implications. So every species that has tried to help your people has eventually concluded that the bond is too dangerous to maintain. Every species except yours, Zeph observed. You're different, Sarah. I can feel it in the way our bond is forming. Your mind doesn't resist the connection, it embraces it. Is that good or bad? I don't know. It's unprecedented. Captain Rivera entered the medical bay at that moment, her expression serious. Dr. Chen, we need to talk. Sarah followed the captain to her ready room, where Crix and several other crew members were waiting. The atmosphere was tense, and Sarah could see concern written on every face. We've been monitoring your interactions with the alien, Captain Rivera began without preamble. Dr. Thas has shared his findings about the biochemical changes you're experiencing. I'm aware of the changes, Sarah said calmly. I don't see them as necessarily problematic. Dr. Chen, Crix interjected, his forearms gesticulating anxiously, you're displaying classic symptoms of early-stage bonding. Your judgment may already be compromised. My judgment feels clearer than ever, Sarah replied, though she could hear the defensive edge in her own voice. That's exactly what every other caretaker has said, the Zephyrian navigator continued. The Velothi records are very detailed about this process. Stage 1 is euphoria and increased empathy. You feel like you understand the Kithara better than anyone else ever has. Captain Rivera leaned forward. What's stage 2? Obsession with the Kithara's well-being to the exclusion of other relationships and responsibilities. The caretaker begins to make increasingly irrational choices to ensure the alien's happiness. And stage 3? Crix's arms stopped moving. Complete psychological merger. The caretaker loses individual identity and becomes essentially an extension of the Kithara's will. At that point, separation is impossible without causing severe trauma or death for both parties. Sarah felt her jaw clench. So you're all suggesting that I abandon Zeph before our relationship becomes inconvenient for the rest of you? We're suggesting, Captain Rivera said carefully, that you consider the possibility that your feelings about this situation may not be entirely your own anymore. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they contained a grain of truth that terrified her. How much of her growing attachment to Zeph was natural human compassion, and how much was alien influence? I need to run some tests, she said finally. What kind of tests? I want to measure my brain activity during interactions with Zeph, and then compare it to recordings from before we made contact. If there are artificial influences at work, we should be able to detect them. Dr. Thas agreed to help with the neurological monitoring, though his tentacles never stopped moving throughout the procedure. Sarah wore a full brain monitoring array while spending time with Zeph, talking, sharing meals, and simply being in the young alien's presence. The results were both fascinating and disturbing. Your brain patterns during contact with the Kithara are unlike anything I've seen, Dr. Thas reported, his scientific excitement temporarily overriding his fear. The emotional processing centers show activity levels that would normally indicate severe psychological distress, but the pleasure centers are simultaneously highly active. It's as if your brain is experiencing the most intense emotions possible while also feeling completely content. Is that necessarily bad? It's unprecedented. Your mind is operating at emotional intensities that should be unsustainable, but you appear to be thriving under the strain. Sarah studied the brain scans, trying to interpret what she was seeing. What about external influence? Is Zeph somehow controlling my emotions? That's where it gets interesting, Dr. Thas said, his tentacles curling with scientific fascination. I can detect the presence of external neurochemical stimuli, compounds that aren't naturally produced by human physiology. But they're not controlling your emotions so much as amplifying them. Amplifying them how? Think of it like this: Zeph isn't making you feel things you wouldn't normally feel. Instead, the alien is somehow enhancing your natural capacity for empathy, protectiveness, and emotional connection. The feelings are authentically yours, but they're much stronger than they would normally be. Sarah considered this information carefully. So the bond doesn't create artificial emotions. It just makes real emotions more powerful. Exponentially more powerful. And the effect appears to be accelerating. That evening, Sarah sat with Zeph in the converted laboratory, sharing a meal while discussing the day's test results. The young Kithara listened intently as Sarah explained what the brain scans had revealed. Are you afraid? Zeph asked when she finished. Sarah considered the question honestly. I should be afraid. Every rational analysis suggests that our bond is changing me in ways that could be dangerous. But, when I'm with you, fear seems unnecessary. The bond doesn't eliminate fear, Zeph said thoughtfully. It just makes love stronger than fear. Is that what this is? Love? What else would you call it? Sarah looked into those expressive eyes and felt the truth of it. Somewhere over the past few days, her scientific interest in Zeph had transformed into something deeper and more personal. She cared about this young alien in ways that defy professional boundaries and rational explanation. The others think you're influencing me, she said. I am influencing you. And you're influencing me. That's how bonds work. Are you changing too? Profoundly. Before you found me, I had given up hope of ever forming a real connection again. I was prepared to spend eternity alone rather than risk the pain of another abandonment. But you make me believe that maybe this time will be different. Sarah reached out and took Zeph's hand, feeling that familiar surge of warmth and connection. What makes you think I'm different? Your species is different. The others that tried to help us, they all approached the bond as something to be controlled or limited. You're approaching it as something to be embraced and explored. That could be incredibly naive of us. Or incredibly brave. Sarah smiled despite her concerns. The captain is planning to call a crew meeting tomorrow to discuss options. They want to abandon me too. They want to protect me from something they don't understand. From something they fear. Zeph corrected. There's a difference, is there? Should I be afraid? Zeph was quiet for a long moment, those unusual eyes reflecting emotions that Sarah was beginning to recognize and share. The bond will change you, Sarah. It's already changing you. Eventually, my well-being will become more important to you than your own life, and your happiness will become more essential to me than my own survival. That sounds like a beautiful kind of love. It is. But it's also the kind of love that consumes everything else. Your career, your relationships with your own species, your independence, all of it will become secondary to our bond. Sarah felt a chill of genuine fear for the first time since rescuing Zeph. And you think that's inevitable? With every other species, yes. But humans. I can feel that you're built differently. Your capacity for intense emotional connection seems much larger than other species. Maybe large enough to contain a bond with me without losing yourselves in the process. Maybe? I don't know, Sarah. No one knows. But I can tell you this: if you choose to abandon me now, it will hurt us both terribly. And if you choose to stay, we'll be walking a path that no human and Kithara have ever walked before. Sarah looked down at their joined hands and made a decision that would define the rest of her life. Then, I guess we'll find out together what humans are really capable of. Outside the laboratory, she could hear the crew moving through their evening routines, unaware that the human among them had just committed herself to a bond that had proved too intense for every other species in the galaxy. But, as Sarah sat there with Zeph, feeling their emotions synchronize in ways that should have been alarming but felt perfectly natural, she couldn't bring herself to regret the choice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult conversations. But tonight, for the first time in centuries, a young Kithara wasn't alone in the universe. And, for the first time in her life, Sarah Chin understood what it meant to love someone so completely that their well-being became inseparable from her own identity. The bond was forming, deepening, and changing them both in ways that neither fully understood. But, unlike every other species that had faced this choice, humanity was about to prove that some connections are worth any risk. The massive Velothi cruiser appeared on the Endeavor's sensors without warning, materializing out of hyperspace with the kind of precision that spoke of advanced technology and urgent purpose. Captain Rivera stood on the bridge, watching the alien vessels approach with growing concern. "They're hailing us," reported the communications officer. On screen. The viewscreen filled with the image of a tall, elegant being whose translucent skin seemed to glow with its own inner light. The Velothi were known throughout the galaxy for their wisdom, their patience, and their reluctance to interfere in the affairs of other species. For them to track down a human research vessel spoke of unusual circumstances. "Captain Rivera," the Velothi said, its voice carrying harmonics that suggested deep emotional distress. "I am Speaker Thalen of the Concord. We have come regarding the Kithara you have taken aboard your vessel." "Speaker Thalen," Rivera replied formally. "We rescued a single survivor from one of your abandoned stations. The being was in distress and needed immediate aid." The alien's luminous features showed what might have been sadness. "Captain, you do not understand what you have done. We must speak immediately, before the situation becomes irreversible." 2 hours later, Speaker Thalen materialized in the Endeavour's main conference room via advanced transport technology. The Velothi stood nearly 8 feet tall, their elongated limbs moving with fluid grace. Despite their serene appearance, Sarah could see tension in the aliens' posture as they prepared to speak. Dr. Chen sat across from the speaker, with Captain Rivera, Dr. Thos, and Crix completing the gathering. Zeph had been asked to remain in the laboratory, though Sarah could feel the young Kithara's anxiety through their growing bond. Dr. Chen, Speaker Thalen began, I must ask you to describe your current emotional state regarding the Kithara called Zeph. Sarah considered the question carefully. I care about Zeph deeply. More than I've ever cared about any research subject. The connection between us feels essential. Essential, the speaker repeated, and Sarah caught a note of profound sadness in the alien's voice. Yes, that is how it always begins. Dr. Chen, I must tell you something that will be difficult to hear. I was one of Zeph's original caretakers. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. You abandoned him. We abandoned him, Speaker Thalen confirmed, and the pain in their voice was unmistakable. After 47 years of care, we made the most difficult decision in our species' history. We left our children behind because we could no longer distinguish between their needs and our own survival. Dr. Thos leaned forward, his tentacles writhing. 47 years? How long do these bonds typically develop? The timeline varies by species, the speaker explained. With my people, the process was gradual. Years of slowly deepening connection, growing emotional dependence, increasing focus on the Kithara's well-being above all other considerations. But, with humans? Captain Rivera asked. Speaker Thalen turned those luminous eyes toward Sarah. We have been monitoring Dr. Chen's neural patterns remotely. The bond is forming at an unprecedented rate. What took decades with my people is happening with humans in a matter of days. Sarah felt a chill of fear. What does that mean? It means you have perhaps weeks before you reach the point of no return. The point where Zeph's needs will override every other consideration in your life. Crix made a chittering sound of distress. Speaker Thalen, can you help us understand what we're dealing with? Why are the Kithara so dangerous? The Velothi was quiet for a long moment, their internal light flickering with what appeared to be painful memories. The Kithara are not dangerous by nature. They are dangerous because of what they represent, a form of love so pure and complete that it destroys the ability to love anything else. I don't understand, Sarah said. Dr. Chen, tell me about your family. Your friends. Your career aspirations. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. She realized that she hadn't thought about any of those things since rescuing Zeph. Her parents, her sister, her research goals, all of it seemed distant and unimportant compared to the young alien's well-being. You see, Speaker Thalen said gently. The process has already begun. Your capacity for connection with your own kind is being redirected toward the Kithara. But, that's just because Zeph needs me right now, Sarah protested. Once he's stable and healthy, I'll be able to focus on other things again. No, Dr. Chen. You will not. That is the fundamental nature of the bond, it only grows stronger with time. Never weaker. Dr. Thos consulted his medical records. Speaker, our scans show that the Kithara appears to be an adolescent. Is that significant? The Velothi's light dimmed noticeably. That is what makes this situation particularly tragic. Zeph is indeed young by Kithara standards, perhaps equivalent to a human teenager. But, Dr. Chen, you must understand that young Kithara have far less control over their bonding abilities than adults. Less control how? Adult Kithara can moderate the intensity of their emotional influence, can choose when to strengthen or weaken bonds. Young ones cannot. Zeph is broadcasting emotional need and connection at maximum intensity without conscious control. Sarah felt her world shifting beneath her feet. So everything I'm feeling, it's not really my choice? It is your choice, Speaker Thalen said carefully. But, it's a choice being made under the influence of the most powerful emotional manipulation in the known galaxy. Not intentional manipulation. Zeph cannot help what he is doing to you. Captain Rivera studied the alien carefully. Speaker Thalen, you mentioned that you were one of Zeph's caretakers. Can you help us understand what happened? The Velothi's entire body seemed to droop with remembered pain. Zeph was one of 7 young Kithera that my people took in after their homeworld's destruction. We dedicated an entire colony to their care, thousands of our best researchers, psychologists, and caretakers.
What went wrong? Nothing went wrong.
Everything went exactly as it should have, according to Kithera psychology. The bonds formed, deepened, and strengthened. Our people became devoted to their charges with an intensity that surpassed any love our species had ever known. Crix made a nervous chittering sound.
But that sounds positive.
It was beautiful, Speaker Thalen agreed.
For the first decade, our colony was a paradise.
Velothi and Kithera lived in perfect harmony, sharing emotions, experiences, and dreams.
The bonds enriched both species tremendously. So what changed?
The bonds continued to deepen. By the second decade, our caretakers were spending 18 to 20 hours per day focused exclusively on Kithera needs. They stopped maintaining relationships with other Velothi, stopped pursuing their own interests, stopped contributing to our broader society. Sarah could see where this was heading, but she found herself unable to accept it.
Surely there could have been a balance.
Dr. Chen, you have known Zeph for less than a week, and you have already begun to lose interest in everything else in your life.
How do you imagine you will feel after a year? After a decade? But Zeph isn't asking me to abandon everything else, Sarah protested.
The Kithera never ask for total devotion, Speaker Thalen said sadly. They simply inspire it, without conscious intent. By the third decade, our caretakers were unable to function independently. They required constant proximity to their Kithera to maintain psychological stability.
Dr. Thos looked up from his medical scanner. What were the physical effects? Severe malnutrition among caretakers who forgot to eat unless reminded by their Kithera.
Sleep disorders.
Complete loss of self-preservation instincts.
Several of our people died because they prioritized their Kithera's minor discomfort over their own serious medical needs.
The conference room fell silent as the implications sank in.
Sarah felt a mix of emotions, fear, anger, and, underneath it all, a growing certainty that none of this applied to her situation with Zeph. There has to be another way, she said finally. Dr. Chen, Speaker Thalen said gently, every species that has encountered the Kithera has said those exact words. The crystalline collective attempted to use technological barriers to limit the bond strength. The result was psychological trauma so severe that several Kithera died and many caretakers suffered permanent brain damage.
What about gradual separation? Impossible once the bond reaches a certain depth. The emotional pain becomes physically unbearable for both parties. Captain Rivera leaned forward. Speaker, what exactly are you recommending?
The Velothi was quiet for a long moment. Immediate separation, while Dr. Chen still retains some psychological independence. We have prepared a specialized facility where Zeph can be cared for without forming dangerous bonds.
Cared for how?
Sarah asked, her voice sharp with sudden anger.
Automated systems can meet all of Zeph's physical needs.
The facility is designed to be comfortable and stimulating.
Zeph would not suffer. But he'd be alone.
Yes.
Sarah stood up abruptly. Absolutely not.
I won't condemn him to solitary confinement because you're all afraid of emotional intensity.
Dr. Thos spoke up nervously.
Dr. Chen, perhaps you should consider that your reaction to this suggestion might itself be evidence of compromised judgment.
Or it might be evidence of basic human decency, Sarah snapped back. Speaker Thalen watched this exchange with obvious sadness.
Dr. Chen, I can see that you believe your bond with Zeph is different from what other species have experienced.
Can you tell me why?
Sarah felt herself struggling to articulate something she felt instinctively.
Because humans were built for intense emotional connections.
We bond with our children, our partners, our communities in ways that completely reshape our priorities and identities.
We don't see that as a loss of self, we see it as growth.
But the bond with a Kithera will override all other connections.
Will it? Or will it just be stronger than the others? Speaker Thalen seemed genuinely intrigued by this perspective. You believe humans can maintain multiple intense emotional bonds simultaneously? I think humans might be the first species capable of loving a Kithera without losing the ability to love others. The Velothi considered this for a long moment. Dr. Chen, what if you are wrong? What if the bond consumes your ability to form any other meaningful relationships?
Sarah looked around the conference room at her colleagues and friends, trying to imagine a future where she cared nothing for their well-being. The thought was genuinely disturbing, but it also felt impossible. Then, I'll have lost something valuable, she admitted. But Zeph will have gained something he's been denied his entire life, someone who chooses to stay.
Even if staying costs you everything else?
Yes. Speaker Thalen's light flickered with what might have been respect. Dr. Chen, I have lived for over 3 centuries and observed dozens of species grapple with this choice. You are the first individual I have encountered who seems genuinely prepared to accept the full consequences of a bond with a Kythera.
Is that good or bad? I honestly don't know.
It may be the beginning of a new chapter for both our species. Or it may be a tragedy of unprecedented proportions.
Captain Rivera had been listening to this exchange with growing concern. Dr. Chen, I need to ask you directly, are you prepared to leave the service if necessary to maintain your bond with Zeph?
The question hit Sarah harder than she had expected. Her career in xenobiology was everything to her, or at least it had been until a few days ago. Now the thought of leaving felt painful but not impossible. I hope it won't come to that, she said. But, yes, if I had to choose, I would choose Zeph. Dr. Thos made a sound of dismay. Dr. Chen, you've just demonstrated exactly the kind of priority shift that Speaker Thalen warned us about.
Or I've demonstrated that some relationships are worth any sacrifice. Speaker Thalen stood, their full height impressive in the confined space. Captain Rivera, Dr. Chen has made her choice. I cannot force her to abandon Zeph, nor would it be ethical to do so now that the bond has begun forming. So what do you recommend? Allow the bond to continue developing, but monitor Dr. Chen's psychological state carefully. If she begins to show signs of dangerous obsession or self-neglect, intervention may be necessary. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward the Velothi. Thank you for understanding. Do not thank me yet, Dr. Chen. You are embarking on a path that has never been successfully completed. You may discover that the warnings you have received are entirely accurate.
After Speaker Thalen left, Sarah made her way back to the laboratory where Zeph was waiting. The young Kythera looked up as she entered, and she could feel his anxiety through their bond.
They want you to abandon me, he said without preamble.
They're afraid for me, Sarah replied, settling into her usual chair beside his resting area.
Are you afraid? Sarah considered the question honestly. Yes. But, not of you.
I'm afraid of losing myself so completely that I become unable to help you in meaningful ways. What do you mean, if I become obsessed with your needs to the point where I can't function independently, I'll be less useful to you, not more?
Zeph was quiet for a moment. Sarah, I need to tell you something. The bond is going to get much stronger as I continue to mature. My abilities will become more powerful, and your emotional responses to me will intensify accordingly. How much stronger?
Strong enough that being separated from me will cause you physical pain.
Strong enough that my distress will feel like your own injury.
Strong enough that ensuring my happiness will feel more important than your own survival. Sarah absorbed this information with surprising calm.
And, you can't control it? Not yet.
Adult Kythera learn to modulate their bonding abilities, but I won't reach that level of maturity for several years, so we have to navigate the most intense phase of our bond while you're still learning to control your abilities.
Yes. And, Sarah, no other species has ever successfully completed that process.
Most abandon their Kythera before reaching full bond intensity. Sarah looked into those expressive eyes and felt the truth of her commitment settling into her bones. Then, I guess humans are about to prove we're different from every other species in the galaxy.
What if we're not different?
What if the bond destroys your ability to care about anyone else? Then, we'll figure out how to live with that, Sarah said simply.
Some bonds are worth any risk, Zeph. Even the risk of losing everything else.
As she spoke those words, Sarah realized that her transformation was already well underway. The woman who had entered this conference room an hour ago would have been terrified by the choices she was making. But, the person she was becoming, someone shaped by an impossible bond with an alien child, felt only a deep sense of rightness about the path ahead. Outside the laboratory, she could hear the crew discussing contingency plans and safety protocols. But, inside, sitting with Zeph and feeling their emotions synchronize in ways that defied every rational warning she had received, Sarah Chin was discovering what it meant to love someone so completely that their well-being became inseparable from her own identity. The warnings had been clear, the risks had been explained, and the choice had been made. Now they would all discover together whether humanity was truly different from every other species in the galaxy, or whether some bonds really were too dangerous to sustain. 3 weeks after the Velothi warning, Sarah Chen barely recognized herself. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror in her quarters, noting the weight loss, the dark circles under her eyes, and the way her hands trembled when she wasn't actively focused on Zeph's well-being. The bond had deepened exactly as Speaker Thalen had predicted, but, instead of feeling alarmed by the changes, Sarah felt only a profound sense of completion. She spent 18 hours a day with Zeph now, monitoring his health, engaging in the complex mental exercises that helped him develop control over his abilities, and simply providing the emotional presence that allowed him to thrive. The remaining 6 hours were divided between fitful sleep and the basic self-maintenance required to keep functioning. "Sarah," Captain Rivera said, appearing in the doorway. "We need to talk. Is everything all right?" Sarah asked, though she found it difficult to focus on anything that didn't directly relate to Zeph. "That's what I want to ask you. When's the last time you ate a full meal?" Sarah tried to remember, but the days had become a blur of caring for Zeph and managing the increasingly complex emotional landscape of their bond. "Yesterday, I think. It was 3 days ago. I checked with the food dispensers in your section." The information registered intellectually, but Sarah found she didn't feel hungry unless Zeph was hungry. Their biological rhythms had begun to synchronize in ways that defied medical explanation. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "No, you're not. And, more concerning, you don't seem to care that you're not fine." Captain Rivera was right, Sarah realized. The gradual deterioration of her physical health barely registered as a concern compared to Zeph's needs. She knew this should alarm her, but the knowledge felt distant and unimportant. "Dr. Thos wants to run some medical tests," the captain continued. "And I'm making it an order, not a request." An hour later, Sarah sat in the medical bay while the Krillian doctor performed a comprehensive examination. His tentacles moved with professional efficiency, but she could see the concern in his movements. "Dr. Chen," he said finally, "your physical condition has deteriorated significantly. You're malnourished, dehydrated, and showing signs of chronic sleep deprivation. But more concerning are the neurological changes." "What kind of changes?" Dr. Thos activated a holographic display showing brain scans from 3 weeks earlier alongside current readings. "The areas of your brain responsible for self-preservation and individual identity have shown dramatically reduced activity. Meanwhile, the sections associated with empathy and caretaking behaviors are hyperactive to a degree I've never seen in any species." Sarah studied the scans with detached interest. "Is that necessarily harmful?" "Dr. Chen, you're asking whether the suppression of your survival instincts is harmful. The fact that the question doesn't concern you is itself evidence of how profoundly you've changed." Before Sarah could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The red alert klaxon sent her heart racing, not with fear for herself, but with overwhelming terror for Zeph's safety. "All hands to emergency stations," Captain Rivera's voice crackled over the intercom. "We have multiple hostile contacts approaching. Repeat, we are under attack." Sarah ran toward the laboratory where Zeph was resting, her mind filled with scenarios of what might happen to him if the ship was damaged. She burst through the doors to find the young Kithara sitting up in alarm, his usual calm demeanor replaced by visible distress. "Sarah, what's happening?" Zeph's mental voice carried undertones of panic that sent corresponding waves of anxiety through Sarah's system. "Pirates, most likely," she said, checking the lab's emergency systems. "But you're safe here. The laboratory has independent life support and reinforced shielding." "I'm not worried about my safety," Zeph replied, his eyes wide with concern. "I'm terrified for yours." The ship shuddered under weapons fire, and Sarah felt Zeph's fear spike through their bond. But, mixed with the fear was something else, a surge of power that made the air in the laboratory crackle with visible energy. "Zeph," she said carefully, "I need you to try to stay calm. Your abilities, I can't control it when I'm this frightened," he said, and Sarah could see tears forming in his large eyes. "Sarah, if something happens to you, I don't think I can survive it." The laboratory door slid open, and Dr. Thos stumbled in, his tentacles writhing in extreme agitation. "Dr. Chen, the captain needs you on the bridge. The attacking ships, they're not after the Endeavor." "What do you mean?"
They're specifically demanding that we surrender the Kythera. Someone leaked information about Zeph's presence on board. Sarah felt ice forming in her chest. Who would do that?
We're not sure, but Captain Rivera thinks it might be related to the black market trade in exotic alien specimens.
A young Kythera would be worth a fortune to the wrong buyers.
The ship shuddered again, more violently this time, and Zeph cried out in distress. The sound triggered something primal in Sarah, a protective fury that felt like nothing she had ever experienced. No one is taking him, she said, her voice carrying a hard edge that surprised even her. Dr. Thos backed away from her, his tentacles pulling tight against his body.
Dr. Chen, perhaps you should consider what? Handing him over to slavers?
Consider that your judgment about this situation may be compromised by your bond with the creature. The word creature sent a spike of rage through Sarah that was magnified tenfold by Zeph's distress.
For a moment, she actually considered physically attacking the Krillian doctor for referring to Zeph in such dehumanizing terms. The intensity of her reaction shocked her back to awareness. Dr.
Thos was right, her judgment was severely compromised.
But that knowledge didn't change her fundamental determination to protect Zeph at any cost. Sarai ***, Zeph's mental voice was strained with effort. ***, I'm losing control.
The fear is making my abilities unstable, ***, she could see what he meant. The air around Zeph was beginning to shimmer with psychic energy, and she could feel pressure building in her skull as his uncontrolled emissions affected everyone in proximity. Dr. Thos, you need to leave, she said urgently. If you stay, you'll be caught in his psychic field.
What about you? I'll be fine. The bond protects me from the worst effects.
The Krillian hesitated, then fled as another wave of psychic energy pulsed through the room. Sarah approached Zeph carefully, reaching out to take his hand despite the dangerous levels of uncontrolled power radiating from his body. The moment their skin made contact, the chaos in the room settled into manageable patterns. Zeph's abilities were still active, but Sarah's presence provided an anchor that allowed him to regain some measure of control. I'm sorry, ***, he said, his mental voice filled with shame. I'm supposed to be learning to control this, but when I thought they might take you away from me, it's okay, Sarah said, though she could feel the psychic pressure affecting her own thought processes.
We'll figure this out together.
The laboratory's communication system crackled to life.
Dr. Chen, this is Captain Rivera. I need you and the alien on the bridge immediately. We're on our way.
Sarah helped Zeph to his feet, noting how much he had grown over the past weeks. He was approaching adult size now, and, with that physical maturity came increasingly powerful abilities that he was still learning to control. They made their way through corridors that showed signs of battle damage, past crew members who gave them a wide berth as they sensed the psychic energy emanating from Zeph.
When they reached the bridge, Sarah was surprised to see that most of the non-human crew had evacuated. Where is everyone? She asked. Safe in the emergency shelters, Captain Rivera replied grimly. Dr. Chen, we have a problem.
The attacking ships have disabled our engines and weapons. They're demanding we surrender the Kythera, and they've made it clear they're willing to destroy the ship if we refuse. Sarah looked at the tactical display, seeing 3 heavily armed vessels surrounding the Endeavor.
How many people are they threatening?
47 crew members, the captain replied.
Dr. Chen, I have to ask, is protecting one individual worth risking the lives of 47 others? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow.
Her rational mind understood the mathematics involved, but her bonded psyche couldn't accept the possibility of abandoning Zeph. The conflict between these perspectives created a cognitive dissonance that left her temporarily speechless.
Sarah ***, Zeph said quietly, ***, she's right.
47 lives are worth more than mine ***, no, Sarah said sharply, surprising herself with the vehemence of her response.
That's not how this works.
Captain Rivera studied her carefully.
Dr. Chen, you're a scientist. You understand utilitarian calculations. 47 lives versus 1.
You're not talking about one life, Sarah replied, her voice growing steadier as she found her argument. You're talking about the only chance an entire species has of finding acceptance in this galaxy.
Zeph isn't just an individual, he's a representative of his people.
That may be true, but my responsibility is to my crew. Zeph stepped forward, his young features set with determination.
Captain Rivera, I can solve this problem.
But I need Dr. Chen to help me.
How?
My people were designed for cooperation and bonding. But we also evolved other abilities that most species never see because they abandon us before we reach full maturity.
Sarah looked at Zeph with sudden understanding.
You're talking about active psychic abilities, not just emotional bonding.
Yes.
But using them at full strength requires absolute trust and cooperation with a bonded partner. Something that's never been achieved with any other species.
Captain Rivera looked between them, clearly struggling with the implications.
What are you suggesting? Let us try to resolve this situation using abilities that have never been tested in partnership with humans, Sarah said.
If we fail, we'll surrender to the pirates.
But if we succeed?
If you succeed? Zeph's eyes glowed with an inner light that Sarah had never seen before.
If we succeed, you'll see what Kithuras are really capable of when they have partners who don't abandon them. The ship shuddered under another weapons blast, and Captain Rivera made her decision.
What do you need? Direct access to the ship's communication systems, Zeph said.
And Dr. Chen's complete trust and cooperation. Sarah looked into those glowing eyes and felt their bond deepen in ways that transcended anything she had experienced before.
You have it. What happened next would be talked about throughout the galaxy for generations to come.
As Sarah and Zeph linked their consciousness in ways that no human and Kithara had ever achieved, the attacking ships suddenly found themselves facing something unprecedented: a fully mature Kithara's psychic abilities channeled through a human partner who was capable of amplifying rather than limiting them. The pirates' aggressive intentions dissolved into confusion, then wonder, then an overwhelming desire to protect rather than exploit the remarkable being they had intended to capture. Within minutes, the attacking vessels were offering escort services and requesting permission to witness the historic partnership between human and Kithara. But the real revelation came when Zeph turned to Sarah with tears of joy streaming down his face.
Do you understand what just happened?
We defended ourselves using your abilities, she replied, though she sensed there was more to it.
No, Sarah.
We proved that the bond between human and Kithara doesn't have to end in abandonment or obsession. We proved that humans are capable of something no other species has ever achieved: true partnership with my people. As the immediate crisis passed, Sarah realized that everything was about to change. The galaxy's understanding of the Kithara, humanity's role in interspecies relationships, and her own future had all been fundamentally altered in the space of a few terrifying minutes. But, sitting there on the bridge, feeling Zeph's joy and relief flowing through their bond while knowing that she had helped save not just his life but the future of his entire species, Sarah Chen understood that some risks are not just worth taking, they're essential for growth. The warnings had been accurate about the bond's intensity and the changes it would bring. But what no other species had discovered was that those changes didn't have to be destructive. In the right partnership, they could be transformative in the most beautiful way possible. 6 months after the pirate incident, Sarah Chen stood before the Galactic Council in the Grand Amphitheater on Concordia Prime. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the vast chamber, their attention focused on the human scientist and her Kithara companion as they prepared to present findings that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of interspecies relationships. Zeph had grown significantly over the months, now approaching full adult size and demonstrating remarkable control over abilities that had once seemed chaotic and dangerous. More importantly, their bond had stabilized into something that defied every prediction made by other species' experiences. Honored representatives, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced acoustics, I stand before you today to present evidence that challenges fundamental assumptions about the Kithara species and the nature of interspecies bonding. Speaker Thalen of the Velothi Concord sat in the front row, their luminous features showing intense interest. Over the months since their first meeting, the Velothi leader had become both advisor and friend to the human Kithara partnership, helping them understand the historical context of their unprecedented relationship. 6 months ago, Sarah continued, I was warned that bonding with a Kithara would result in the loss of my individual identity, the destruction of my relationships with my own species, and an obsessive focus that would render me unable to function in normal society. She gestured to Zeph, who stepped forward with quiet confidence. Today, I present Zeph, my research partner, my friend, and my bonded companion, as evidence that these warnings, while well-intentioned, were based on incomplete understanding of both Kithara psychology and human adaptability. A murmur ran through the assembled representatives. The crystalline collective spokesperson, a being of living crystal whose faceted surface reflected rainbow patterns, spoke first. Dr. Chan, our records indicate that your bonding process proceeded exactly as predicted for the first several weeks.
What changed? Sarah smiled, feeling Zeph's supportive presence through their connection.
What changed was our understanding of why other species were forced to abandon their Kithera companions. We discovered that the problem was never the intensity of the bond itself.
Then, what was the problem? Asked the Zartani representative, their multiple eyes focusing intently on the human.
Zeph stepped forward, his adult voice carrying harmonics that resonated with psychic undertones. The problem was that every other species approached the bond as something to be controlled, limited, or contained. They fought against the natural deepening of the connection, creating internal conflict that made the relationship unsustainable. Dr. Thos, who had traveled to Concordia Prime as part of the human delegation, raised his tentacles nervously.
But, surely unlimited bonding leads to the loss of individual identity?
That's what we thought too, Sarah replied. But, we discovered something remarkable about human psychology.
We don't experience intense emotional bonds as threats to our identity, we experience them as expansions of our identity. Speaker Thalen leaned forward with interest. Can you explain this distinction? Sarah activated a holographic display showing brain scans taken throughout her bonding process with